Thank you very much. So yeah, so as Phoebe introduced, we're going to do an introduction to the AI fundamentals course today. Now, to give that and frame this, I am going to quickly introduce myself and just put some contact details up on screen, just because, well, I like hearing questions from people after the fact. Please engage with the sprint team if you're wanting to go further. Any specific questions, though, about what we're covering, I'm happy to hear them after the session as well. Please connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. It'd be great to hear from you and know where you go in your journey with certification. Now, for many people, the hardest part of any part of this is knowing where to start. How do we get going in certification? Now, this is where in the Microsoft world, the fundamentals courses come into play. Now, the Azure AI fundamentals course underpins a couple of routes into your Microsoft qualification future, and it's designed for a few different audiences. So to give you a brief overview, now this is all available on the core Microsoft website. It's available on Firebrand's website as well, okay? And was available as part of this. The AI fundamentals is a single day course, as Phoebe's already mentioned, okay? It is instructor-led. There are labs and hands-on portions to this course. This isn't just a day where someone sits and talk, that you sit there and hear someone talk at you. Believe me, Firebrand never run a course like that anyway. But it's interactive and it's about you understanding and at the end being able to describe key principles around artificial intelligence, natural language processing, conversational AI, the key core tenets about artificial intelligence on the Azure platform. Note, I say it's about being able to describe it. I like to refer to the fundamentals level as us learning the same language. Whatever you're entering into, whether it's Azure fundamentals, the AI fundamentals, the data fundamentals courses, these really are the open pathways for everyone. Whether you're in sales, whether you're marketing, whether you're a technical person, these are a great introduction that help everyone talk the same language. Now, this feeds into Microsoft's role-based certifications. Now, for many years, Microsoft has been doing certifications. When I say many years, we're talking over 2 decades now. They are, from a technical provider perspective, very mature in what they're delivering here. And a number of years ago, they made a defined switch towards role-based rather than product-based training. What does that mean? Well, before you might have received a qualification that certified you on a specific product, whether that be SQL Server or whether that be Excel or something along those lines. What they found, particularly when dealing with the cloud offerings, is the products were moving so quickly. There were new products coming into market that meant the courses and the qualifications weren't meeting people's needs. And in most cases, particularly at the fundamentals level, they didn't really meet anyone's need. They were just somewhere in no man's land. These fundamentals courses, though, are focused around the topic, and the further qualifications are as well, rather than the individual products. So as we talk through this, and as if you go onto the main course, we will cover topics around AI and artificial intelligence and allow you to kind of soak up that language, soak up that information, so that you can then understand what we talk on in further courses. Now, where does it fit in the path? Well, you do become a certified professional with a fundamentals certificate, okay? So it gets you that status, but it is the first step, okay? Now, there are 2 paths that follow on from this. Firstly, is to a data science associate. Now, data science is a term you'll have heard bandied around an awful lot, okay? Data science is a very specific practice. We're about exploring and understanding the data, and the science bit is really important here because it's about hypothesizing and experimenting to see if your hypothesis was correct. How can we work with the information we have? And most of our organizations now have a wealth of information that we're rarely ever tapping. How can we utilize that better? Now, one point I do want to dispel. Data science is not about report building. Data analytics isn't about report building either, but that's a side point. I just want to make that very clear, though. We're not talking about someone who sits there and uses crystal reports or access reporting. We are talking about someone who can make use of mathematical algorithms in the best way to analyze your data and identify things. And some of the things that they can identify, we will talk through over this day. Okay. Now, this isn't the only path, because the data science route is excellent for those who have domain knowledge. Data science, we take the sphere of domain knowledge, we take some technical knowledge, and data science sits in the middle. Okay. But you do need that domain knowledge. What if you're a generic consultant working? You don't necessarily have that domain knowledge, or if you're just trying to expand your skills. Well, there is another path now, and that's the AI engineer. Okay, now in the AI engineer role, it's all about setting up these environments and creating the models to be able to be used. Okay. It's still an advanced certificate. You'll notice these are both associate level. They allow you to prove competency and show that implementation can happen. Now, Microsoft certifications, aside from the fundamentals, are slightly backwards compared to other courses you might see, or other certifications. So the Microsoft courses, whilst it's about skilling you up, it's actually more about validating the knowledge that you hold and completing it on the course. So for an AI engineer, they want you to have done or attempted to deploy workloads before you try and do the course and the certification, because it's important to understand it. Okay. Now, there is a further tier if you're on your Microsoft journey, this expert tier. I've got it grayed out because within the artificial intelligence space right now, there isn't an expert certification for this. Okay. Now, there are expert certifications for development, for solution architecture. There's even a DevOps expert tier. But for artificial intelligence, at this point, there is not. I know it will be on the roadmap and it will be coming. And if you are in the data space and that is where your career lies, it is worth exploring and looking at those options. And I would highly recommend it as a path for you. Now, we talked about the course. We talked about the structure of the way the certification works. Okay, and the way the exam works, there are plenty of useful tools out there. I do want to highlight something else if you are interested in when we come to it to go on to the main course. And that is the fact that there are core online materials available from Microsoft as part of Microsoft Learn. Okay, now this is preparation for the exam, the AI 900. As you scroll down, you've got 2 ways to prepare. Now, this is a bit disingenuous. The one-day course is actually built on the premise that you have done a good portion of this online preparation. Okay, the reason for that is there is a lot of practical examples available within the online tools that there may not be time to do in a single day. I highly recommend you do that. We'll make sure it goes out in the link with the materials at the end as well. And it is part of the pre-reading material for any course, any fundamentals course, okay? They're really, really great resources. They're really useful. They're an excellent way to go back to for reference as well. Okay, so let me quickly flick back. Now, what I'd like to do now is just go through some of the first module to give a brief overview. Now, this is not exactly the format or the way it will be run through on the day, but I want to ask the questions and introduce you to the concepts. Okay, there will be time, as Phoebe said at the end, to run through this. So we're going to take about half an hour now to run through some of this content, and then we'll pause and go through questions. As Phoebe said, if you hold the key questions to the end, that's great. I can see the chat window in front of me though. So if there is anything specific as I run through this, or you want to interject, ask. I keep an eye on it as I'm going. So there may be things that I can bring in as we're talking. Okay, so the first question we want to ask, it's an AI fundamentals course. What is artificial intelligence? Now, we've all been living in this wonderful world of sci-fi for many years. One of my favorite films from childhood with Terminator 2, Skynet. That's artificial intelligence, right? Unfortunately, we're not quite there. There is no universal model yet. I'm quite pleased by that, if I'm completely honest. But Skynet is not quite there. But what defines something as being artificial intelligence? What is that? Where does that come into play? Well, a very simple definition would be that software that imitates human capabilities, okay, or mimics it. Now, that seems a very vague statement, but let's talk through some of the characteristics that we are talking about in there. And while we're doing it, if you think about the applications that you use on a day-to-day basis, and some of the ones we'll illustrate, you'll see the difference between these types of applications and which ones are utilizing artificial intelligence and which ones are not. So, the first key difference between an AI based application and a traditional one would be, just like a human, its decisions are based on previous experience. Now, this creates some interesting issues for us. When we go to test a normal program, if anyone's in the world of software development, yeah, absolutely. Someone's mentioned the Turing test, and we'll come on to that with conversational AIs. But when we go to test the system, normally in programming, we say the system is going to do X. Therefore, when I give it an input, it's always going to give me a certain output. If the decision can change based on what experience it had in the past, it's very hard for me to say what that defined output is necessarily going to be. It's a bit like when we work out or when we deal with things. As we train, we get better at a given task. We get more efficient at it. That doesn't mean every single time we do the same task, we're going to do it in exactly the same way. And that doesn't mean the output's going to be identical. Which leads us to a quite interesting thing. There's a weird dichotomy with humans. We are fantastic at recognizing patterns. Absolutely awesome. And at the same time, we are terrible at it. It's a weird statement, that, isn't it? But we are. If you want things that a computer could traditionally deal with, a human could spot an error or an anomaly in it quite easily, where a computer could not. However, we're very bad at repetitively doing that because we fool ourselves. We generate patterns where there are none. The social version of that is conspiracy theories. We look for patterns where there are none because that's our nature. Now, I'm not saying that all conspiracy theories are wrong, whatever. It's the point around it. We try and generate a pattern where there may be none. Now, an artificial intelligence won't do that. It will look for a pattern. And this is where it's often better, specifically at noting abnormal events. Now, to be able to do this, we have to build on the previous characteristic. It has to be able to learn from past data. Now, when we're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning models, we talk about training them. Okay, and that is a very important point. Now, there are lots of ways of training that are out scope of today. I'll show you some output from training models, which are in a little while, which are quite interesting and, if I'm honest, a little bit scary, but it's an important aspect. And actually, this is possibly one of the most utilized areas right now for AI in industry. Okay. We can use it to interpret visual input. Now, prior to the development of the technology that we use underpinning artificial intelligence for visual understanding, so edge detection, the neural networks that live within this world, it was very hard to identify specific things within images. They were just a blob of data that we had to work with. Okay. Now, how many of you use Facebook? How many of you have uploaded a photo to Facebook? I'll be honest, I rarely do. Not a big fan of their terms, but if you use any cloud storage for your imagery, though, nearly all of them have some means of interpreting what's in the photo. It will help you identify the people in the photo, the objects in the photo. Have you ever used the search element within OneDrive Photos or Google Photos? Search for any object, search for text, and it'll bring every photo you've got in your library that has those concepts within it. It's quite scary. It's quite cool. That is essentially built on what we would refer to as artificial intelligence. Understanding written and spoken languages. Now, as you can see with most of these things, we're not talking about something that radically appeared within the last year or two. This development within artificial intelligence has been going on for decades. Okay. I remember working with systems back in the 90s, early iterations of speech recognition to enable us to allow people to work with systems, spoken language systems. Yet these are tools that we often take for granted. Now, there's two sides to this. One is one of the tools that's been around for over a decade now that we often do take for granted, but Translate. Microsoft Translate, Google Translate, whichever one you want, is using these same fundamental concepts and capabilities inside it to enable you now, not that many of us are getting to travel right now, but when you're abroad, to have a real-time conversation and have it translated for you with someone who's speaking a different language. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but that's Star Trek to me. That's freaking awesome. It's a really, really amazing capability where we've got to with it. Okay, and then that leads us to the other side. And someone mentioned the Turing test. One of the key points is engaging in dialogues and conversation. Now, I almost guarantee all of us have engaged some form of artificial intelligence in a conversation at some point in the last month. Whether it's requesting help on a bot from a bot on a website, whether it's talking to Siri or Alexa, whatever it is, you are engaging with artificial intelligence. And it is responding and having a conversation of some form with you. Now, the nature of that conversation and the level of that conversation is interesting. And how things can deteriorate, particularly if we've tied together this ability to make decisions based on past experience and engage in the conversations together could be an interesting point. When we'll come on to that in a few moments, but it's something that's in the wild, but it's a core characteristic and things to look for. Now, the workloads that underpin this, though, have different names. So we've looked at core concepts. We've looked at where the ways in which we might interact, but the workloads themselves, well, this is where the language comes in. So the first one you will have heard of is machine learning. We've talked about it, training, understanding. Machine learning is where we have a model that the computer can use to generate decisions. Now, the model is learned by the machine by studying the data and applying a specific algorithm over it, okay? In the end, when we use machine learning, no one person knows the algorithm that is necessarily making the final decision. Now, that's quite scary. Don't get me wrong, the output is very good, but not knowing necessarily in each instance what the decision is going to be for a given piece of input is always a little scary. Now, we have major testing regimes and other things that go on, but based on the input that we provide, it will produce a statistical model and produce a decision tree on how it should work. Okay. Now, for those of you who like mathematics, everything in this world is some form of linear algebraic progression. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's all as simple as the most basic one you've seen, but it is some form of it. Okay. So if you want to investigate further and look into models, if you're comfortable with linear algebra, this shouldn't be terrible to work through and understand the basic principles of. And there are some great resources out there to get you started. Okay. We've looked at machine learning. Now, one of the models, the key models on there, is anomaly detection. And this is a really common workload. Now, I said I'd give a brief example of this. So one of the examples you can see working in the wild is actually on a production line. So that Microsoft have uploaded the tutorial for you if you download the machine learning virtual machine from them. And the tutorial has a predefined set of data, which is a set of circuit boards images. Now, these circuit board images have been taken by a camera on the production line. Every time the circuit board comes through, snap, it takes a photo, and we go forward. Now, what they were wanting to do was improve the quality of the outputted items so they could work through what was going on. But obviously, the production line runs at a very fast pace. And if the quality is low to start with, they wanted to stop these items going out to the public. They applied anomaly detection to this alongside some form of computer vision. I'll come back to computer vision, don't worry. But the anomaly detection they applied, they trained it with giving it a set of images of good circuit boards. So someone manually eyeballed the image sets, went, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. And they went through and flagged the ones that were bad as well in the image set they had. That's a lot of manual work, I know. But from that initial training data, they were able to build an anomaly detection model for these circuit boards. Now, where a human would take a few seconds to analyze, to look at, to examine, and then decide, the system was deciding within a fraction of a second whether something was good or bad. As I said, this is a training exercise you can go through from the Microsoft tools and work through this and see what's going on. It's incredible. Feeding in this set of images, it will notice the difference between the images immediately and ignore the irrelevant difference. It will just focus on the circuit board and see what's different on there. Now, it was catching things such as a misplaced solder, a missing component, anything like that. It would identify and shunt it into the failed components pile. And this is in the wild and in use. Okay. Computer vision. There have been huge advances in this area, and it's constantly moving. It really is an exciting area to work within. And I highly recommend you examine this for anything that you're doing. Now, the level that we've taken this to is not only identifying a person or an object, which obviously has immediate connotations. The first time I came across the object identification was actually when working with a group of people who were doing the most horrendous of jobs. They were trying to identify places where children had been abused. So they wanted no human to look at these images, and they'd scan through to identify common features within them to see where they had potentially been taken, and scan other images to help identify them, so that no human was being affected by the horror in those images. The other side that they've developed to that, though, is far more useful for us in the day-to-day. That's an amazing use, but what if you were able to see, like it would be kind of nice for me right now, your reactions as you're watching this, but get an overall feel for the sentiment of everyone watching? We can do that. So I could, if I had all your cameras on, and I'm not going to ask you to do that, don't worry. But if all your cameras are on, we could take a shot of that and feed that into the computer vision algorithm, one of the ones that Microsoft has, and we'll have a look at that briefly, and it will tell me what it thinks your emotional state is, if you're happy, sad, engaged, or not. How cool is that? We can see the state of mind from someone just the way a human would interpret it by looking at their face. Now, this can lead to odd choices organizationally or other things, but it can also help us note what's happening, whether our message is being carried across properly. I always find it quite scary when you think about the potential to use these things for sales purposes, but it's actually really helpful. If we're able to engage and look at images in that way, how cool is that? Okay, so we've looked at computer vision, we've looked at machine learning and anomaly detection. Another really common workload is natural language processing. Now, this does underpin the next point we're going to go on to about conversations and being able to interact with systems. But this allows us to interpret what's going on, not only to identify using the image recognition what text is actually there, but the key word here is interpret the text. Now, just like we can look at an image, and based on how we trained it, we can associate an emotion to the facial expression of someone on that image. Actually, we can analyze the sentiment of the text or of the spoken word. Now, the spoken word could be via tone, not just simply the words that are stated, but both carry through. And natural language processing allows us to do that interpretation. That all sounds cool and clever. What's the practical application, though? Have any of you used Grammarly? It's an excellent tool if you've not used it to improve your writing. It will analyze what you've written and help you form the tone to a given target. Now it uses natural language processing to read the text. Yes, it reads it, understand the flow. It will also check grammar, but it's looking specifically at the tone that you've aimed at and how it's being phrased. It's understanding and therefore reinterpreting what you've put there. Very, very cool, very, very powerful. That's a simple use case that enables our individual days to improve. But what about if we've got a whole team? Well, how about helping a busy team understand the tone that their customers are using with them? How about enabling people, salespeople, customer service people, to understand if a customer is upset or not, simply based on the system flagging it up, so that they know that a ticket that's 20 down the queue is actually urgent because someone's got a real problem there. We can start to adjust our workloads based on this emotive information. Now, this is something we would naturally have done if people were in front of us. If you can see someone's truly annoyed and they've come into your office, you tend to jump on the task or appease them in some way and work with them. When we're in this remote distributed world, that becomes a lot harder. People don't engage in the same way. Actually being able to know if you've got a truly annoyed email in your inbox before you get there, that's really useful. And allows you to adjust your day and plan around things in the right way and respond appropriately. The other side is it allows you to train. So one of the really interesting uses I've seen for this is actually training a team to be better at customer service by analyzing all of their email outputs and saying, when the customer responded in this way, you responded, so when they responded negatively, you responded massively positively, and you've just turned them off. It's a very simple approach to it that applies this really amazing technology to a real world scenario. Okay, I don't want to get tied up too much. I'll blab on for ages otherwise. So, conversational AI. Now this is massively in use. It's an amazing, amazing capability. If you've ever requested from Amazon a refund through the chat system, you've actually spent most of your time, in fact, possibly all of your time, chatting with an AI. Is this your product? What can I do to help you? Are you sure you want this refund? Okay, I can put that on a card for you. That is all an AI. It's very rarely you get through to an agent at that point. Now, when they don't identify it clearly as an AI, that's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a capability that's really useful. Now, did anyone see, it was the Google conference 3-4 years ago, where they upgraded Google Assistant. And they allowed Google Assistant, and they haven't rolled this out across the board because it raised too many eyebrows, to make phone calls for you to do bookings. To give you an illustration of how powerful the conversational UI is. Now, in the day course, we would show this video so you can see. We don't necessarily have time just now, but the Google Assistant ran through and asked questions and responded as if it was a human. Now they've had to rein that back in. So let's take a think through this. So I think this, if I remember rightly, the scenario was we were booking into an appointment at the hairdresser's. And it made the call, person answered, it waited for them to give their greeting and went, hey, have you got any availability for this time on this day? I need a haircut. And they the human responded as they would normally, and gave a conversational point around it. the system responded in a conversational manner. It was all very, very odd to me in the fact that it was not a human responding, but it's extremely powerful. It's not about detracting from people's jobs here either. It's about improving what we're achieving and creating a place where we can work together better. But that leads us on to some points around the technology and the ethics as well, which I'm going to try and get onto now quickly. So just a reminder for you, this is going out in the video as well, but you can see these are the core workloads we've just been talking about. These underpin everything within this fundamentals course. It's worthwhile remembering. Now, within Azure itself, well, we know about Azure. It's a hyperscale cloud platform, many data centers globally, well worth having a look at. But there are some core features within here I want to identify for you. Okay, so Azure machine learning. There are machine learning capabilities, toolkits there for those of you who want to understand some of the underlying workings of how the models can be generated and to generate your own. This is awesomely useful and will really help you. The getting started path to this, there are awesome materials within the online learning that will guide you through downloading and getting started. However, someone's done a lot of the work for us. And this is one of the areas in which Microsoft decided to take a different path to other providers. So rather than forcing you to build your own models and train everything yourself, actually, we're going to make use of what's already there. We're going to make use of the services that have already been pre-trained. That's in this area called cognitive services. Now, the cognitive services Microsoft have provided fall under 4 categories: vision, speech, and it's just gone from my head. I can't remember the other 2. But there are a number of categories. I've got a huge list of them available for you. And these are APIs, service endpoints, that can be called by developers without the developer knowing anything about the way the model works. So I can provide a block of text that's come from a system and give it to an API called Text Analytics, and it will ask me, it will show me, what the sentiment was in that text. I can do the same for many other tools and capabilities as well. It's amazingly useful to be able to run through and test it out. Now, I did have it open on another window here for you, which is what I was just looking at, but we'll maybe send out a link for that. On the Azure portal, you can actually see examples of this working directly and see the analysis. And through the tutorials on there, you can also pass in your own text and see how it changes. It's also worth noting that cognitive services, for you to learn how to use that, it is free. Now, all of these services that are exceptionally complicated, exceptionally powerful, are actually relatively cheap to use. Well worth a look. Now, the Azure bot service does exactly what it would say on the tin. It helps you build a conversational AI that can be utilized across the board. Okay, this allows you to engage with customers, with internal customers, and work with them. Now, the bot service is aimed at developers, okay? But what we are doing in this area is not limited to you having to have a developer or a savant in this area to be able to engage with it. This is the democratization of AI we are looking at. Now, on the far left, you'll notice I have Power Virtual Agents. Now, this isn't part of the core AI 900 course, but I want to highlight it to you because it is a code-free option built on all the same technologies we've been talking about. So it's a no-code option to enable your team to build conversational bots. Now, why might you want to use this? How about your service desk? How about we remove the noise? Now, this is a big thing for me. Phoebe mentioned I'm the group director of IT for quite a number of colleges within there. I think I've got somewhere in the region of 20,000 students who are using systems I'm responsible for. It's a large number of people we're dealing with. As with anything, the biggest noise are the questions that they could have an easy response to, that we've already answered somewhere in an FAQ, or they just need a helping hand to guide them through. Power Virtual Agents is something we're about to implement to enable the team to do the work that I've asked them to, and enable the things they've already written down to help everyone else. It will guide people to not simply point them to the FAQ and say, that's it, but actually guide them through the whole flow and say, oh, you can't reset your password. Well, what you need to do is if you go here, right, you're there now, great. Why don't you do this? And take them through the process. It creates a conversational flow that in my instance, direct productivity wise, should free up about 25% of my engineers' time. That's a significant saving despite the investment in setting it up. Well worth looking at. Now, I said I would look at the cognitive services here very briefly. Now, when I say I have a large list of them, it's huge. Okay, so these are all services that are available for you to consume within AI, within Azure, okay? As you can see, there are tons of these directly available for you. I've mentioned Face about looking and analyzing photos. HealthBot is particularly important right now. We have a capability to read health information and analyze. Yes, even doctors' handwriting can be read now. How a machine can do what a human can't in that regard. There you go. One other one I'd really like to highlight to you, though, is the form recognizer. If you are going through a digital transformation, now we've all had a COVID digital transformation forced on us, but if you are going through a digital transformation, the form recognizer is an amazing way to help you on that journey. It is an exceptionally powerful tool that will allow you to identify from a page, from a PDF, from unstructured data that can be utilized by someone. Now, the form recognizer capabilities are brand new, they're very powerful, and they're downright scary. 5 years ago, I was working with a team hoping to have something along these lines working. It's taken to now to get it to a point where it's truly democratized. Okay, you pay per call into this. So if you're only recognizing a few forms, the cost is appropriate. Well worth a look. Now, I'm aware I'm starting to run out of time here, and I hope I've kept you engaged and it's been enjoyable so far, but I have one more topic to go on to. Now, everything I've talked about so far has been positive and exciting, but I did start by mentioning Skynet. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard Elon Musk or others talking about the dangers of AI and machine learning. Now, they are real, but they are the same dangers that we face as humans in many ways. Okay? Now, there are many challenges that affect this, and I want to run through some of them so you're aware of them and that you keep them in mind. A very popular topic to talk about right now, but bias. Bias is rampant in AI models by the nature of how they are trained. If the data is in any way biased, the model in the end will be biased. Let's take an example of insurance. If we have a larger subset of data where there's more crashes by men than women, men will have a higher premium than women. Now, whether that's correct or not is a totally separate argument, but the model is automatically biased, no matter the driver's record, based on their gender. Now that presents in many countries an issue around equality laws and other things. So we need to be aware of this. Okay, so errors can also cause harm. Now, self-driving cars is a massive evolution in what we're doing and will massively change the way we work and the way we commute and go around things. But it's a great example of where errors can truly cause harm. The first fatality of a self-driving car happened back in 2017. Okay, and we'll may talk a little bit briefly on that, but your data could be exposed. This is a data security risk. The way it works, there are many risks within here. Okay, the solutions may not work for everyone, and this is actually one of the largest problems with AI and training. Whilst there can be some generic models, there is not a single generic model. AI is mimicking human capability. It does not yet have humans' capability to inspect and adapt to that level. So we train specific models for specific tasks. And once they're applied to a different task, they do not achieve it in the same way. Not without retraining, not without readjustment. In some ways, it's a bit like a human, I know, but it's still worth examining and looking at and being aware of that fact. Now, one of the ones that is often not noted is that users must trust it. Okay. Now, that trust is very hard to regain if it's lost. Self-driving cars is a great example. By that one fatality, which is in no way insignificant, I hasten to add, the entire program of work on that was put back by years. Okay. And which leads us nicely to who is liable for the AI-driven decisions. If a car crashes into another car and it's a self-driving car, is the passenger sat in the car liable? Or is the manufacturer liable? Or is the programmer liable? Who is liable for that effect and that error? These are all things you need to think about and consider, but they're worth considering when you're looking at what you're doing. Now, I said I'd talk very briefly, and I will finish this within just a minute, I promise, about the crash and errors that may cause harm. Now, self-driving cars is a really interesting problem from a bias perspective, from a data perspective, and from a liability perspective as well. The reason for this is culturally around the world, the decision that people would make changes. Now, it's not whether the cultural choice is right or wrong, it's what our interpretation of it that causes a problem here, okay? The question about whether you should swerve to avoid an animal. Well, in some cultures, they wouldn't. In others, they would. If you're given a difficult choice, do I hit the old person or the young person if there's a no-win scenario? What choice does it make? These are actually culturally ingrained rather than necessarily moral choices that we would consider in the same way. And this is an area where we're still developing and working out. And this is the area in which bias culturally does influence the model and make the difference. Okay, so it's well worth examining, thinking about your own perceptions in regard to this when applying it. Now, most of us, we're not going to be building models to this level, okay? But still think about the implications for your teams, for your customers, for your staff, as you are looking to apply them. As long as you consider it and think about it, as far as I'm concerned, you're starting to meet your ethical duty to apply this carefully and consistently. Well, thank you. I hope it's been interesting, and I'm going to pass it over for questions now with Phoebe. And let's see where we go.
Thanks very much for that, John. That was brilliant. Really like the imagery, the visual aids you used as well. Does anyone have any questions for John regarding today's webinar? Yeah, now is your time to ask. In the meantime, I might start off the Q&A if that's all right with you, John. So
Sure.
given today's climate with COVID-19, why would you say that this is a good certification to achieve? Why would you encourage achieving this certification?
Sure. Okay, so at this point in time, we're all in lockdown. We're all in the middle of the largest shake-up in how we're working that we've seen in decades, in all honesty. And we're having to find new ways and change the way in which we're working. I believe this certification will massively help you and your teams to work through new ways of achieving the same end. So where we before would concentrate on our transactional systems, so scanning a document, for example, now we need to think about how we can interpret that to flag it to someone because they're already swamped.
Right.
And I think enabling your team to understand the capabilities so we can all talk on the same level immediately allows us to work on new solutions.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Callum has asked, how long did the development process take to create the service desk chatbot?
So it's varying and it's in continual development at this point. Okay, so the first stage was relatively quick because we held a lot of our service desk facts and information within Dynamic CRM. So that integrated with Power Agents immediately. So we were able to use that. The second stage of refining it, working out where we had the gaps and working through that, that's constantly ongoing and will be ongoing for bluntly the life of the system. It's never going to stop changing. I think we're going to put an end to the window of the core alterations to it though within about 2 months.
Okay.
And leave it to run and see where we go.
Okay. Abby has asked, what are the prerequisites for this course to attend?
So there are no prerequisites on this course. Anyone can join and get started. The only statement I would make on that is there is pre-reading, as I said. The Microsoft Learn online resources, it's well worth going through them at the same time.
Okay. James has asked, from a legal standpoint, where does the liability of AI decision making currently fall?
That depends on the country, the nature of the AI, and what we're dealing with in terms of the action that occurred. So the liability for, let's take our split-second trading as an example, the models that were enabling that, the liability for that actually ended up landing with one of the developers of the system when a major fault occurred, which in the States has set some precedent. For most of it, it's with the organization that deploy it rather than the end user. But again, that really depends.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I'm just going to say really quickly, as there's been quite a few questions, there will be a recording of this session that will be sent out in a follow-up email. We will be delivering this course actually at the end of February, so in about a month's time. So if you have we'll be sending you a link to that. So if this webinar has enticed you to get certified, please register with us. Next question. Graham has asked, we hear a lot about AI and blockchain. Where do you see the connection between these technologies?
Okay, so I would say that AI is a solution to many people's problems and has been developed as a solution to problems. Blockchain, I would say, is a solution looking for a problem, and in most cases is not really applicable. There are great reasons to use blockchain, chain of custody, provenance, proving the records, proving where containers or shipments have been is really valuable, but it seems very heavyweight for what it's doing often. Cryptocurrency is obviously the core piece for this. The link between the two, it's all about tracing the decisions that have been made. So if we use blockchain to store choices that have been made as they've occurred, we can create an irrevocable history to a given asset or something, even if AI has been involved in those decisions.
Okay, brilliant. It's about to be 11 o'clock and thus the end of the webinar. I think that's it for questions. Thanks everyone for joining. If you have any more questions, feel free to email us at sprint@firebrandtraining.com. And I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks again, John, for joining us. This will be your first sprint. Look forward to your next one. And everyone have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks again, John.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.